hell happened to Borderlands? It's 2009, you get home from buying your first iPhone, you turn on your oversized 32-inch 720p TV, watch an episode of Scrubs, take Modern Warfare 2 out of your disk tray, and spend the next 6 hours doing nothing but looting and shooting through a single game. Describing what Borderlands is a bit like trying to explain to a time traveler why Jimmy Fallon is funny. It's hard. There's not a single series in gaming quite as enigmatic, abrasively weird, consistently enjoyable, and well, consistently inconsistent. When most people got their hands on the first Borderlands game, it appeared revolutionary. An FPS that took most of the loot ideas of something like a Diablo and stretched them across a giant cel-shaded open world. What Borderlands became is just a little different. Now it's 2018 and Borderlands has had a new entry drought that appears as though it may actually last nearly the entirety of a generation. Today we look at why Borderlands has been absent, why gamers have turned against its developer and leader, and what caused this franchise's rough patch, and most importantly, why the franchise's return is facing an uphill battle. The wasteland keeps getting weirder.
10 years have passed since the Third World War. The most valuable resources in this terrible new world? Food, water, gasoline.
Here is an actual quote from the mind behind Borderlands when asked about the people who hate his games. I read it in this way: we moved those people, we touched them. Even the person who hates your game so much, you've affected them, that's why we fight. We're creating emotion and experience, and some people thrive on that type of feeling, some people are sadists. This Randy Pitchford quote is essentially a backwards line of reasoning that attempts to explain why it's okay that people hate his work, because most of those people just like the pain of disappointment. This is Randy Pitchford in the most rotten of nutshells. This is context. Randy Pitchford is one of the principal founders of Gearbox Studios. After having worked on Duke Nukem 3D early in his career and having a near lifelong obsession with numbers-based RPGs, Pitchford developed the idea for Gearbox's flagship title, Borderlands. He wanted a hybrid of these two genres. He bet on a belief that the quick in-and-out gameplay of a shooter and the more deliberate gameplay of RPGs were not mutually exclusive, and that there was a hole in the medium that could be filled by this kind of game. What followed was a development cycle of convenience. The cel-shaded art style was meant to do nothing but allow for ease in creation of the pitch demos, but became a permanent staple, leading to the game's original art director leaving the project altogether. The Vault Hunter storyline simply fit the loop-based elements of the gameplay, and the gameplay never wavered from its original ideals. Borderlands was revealed in the September 2007 issue of Game Informer, convenience and all, and at the time, analysts like the maligned Michael Batcher anticipated failure for the game, saying this hybrid would bore mainstream fans of the FPS genre. But when it launched 2 years later, well, yes, the game was missing certain things that it was originally said to have. There was no procedurally generated dungeon system, there was no single-player buddy or gun-for-hire system, but it did not matter. No, despite rose-tinted glasses, Borderlands was not the critical darling to change gaming. It evened out aggregately at about an 85 review score, but it sold, and sold for a very long time. Instead of shocking the market and pushing a crazy number of units day one, its tail slowly pushed the game over 5 million units sold. Its combination of loot and shoot long before the destinies of the world was something that gamers latched onto. For $60, they got a game that was endlessly playable and endlessly surprising, and while it failed on the story front and tapered off in quality towards its climax, it earned its sequel. And it's around this time that Borderlands came into its own, and its developer began to fall apart.
Not so fast, y'all. You think you can just up and run away? You crazy. I like to eat people from other planets, especially y'all. I like to eat you with my little mouth, too.
Have you ever seen the Titanic? You know the movie where literally everything in it crashes, burns, and sinks to the ground? You're about to hear about the sequel. In 2007, Gearbox began work on Aliens Colonial Marines, codenamed Pecan. It was to be an FPS that would rise above the rest of the licensed game pack and become something greater. And then, Randy Pitchford and Gearbox happened, and the game became quite literally gaming's greatest cluster. This story has been told plenty of times, so here's the cliff notes. Gearbox and Pitchford lied profusely to Sega about what they were doing with the game. They lied to the public about what the game was. They created misleading trailers and advertising. They created an absolutely awful game. And what's most important here is why Sega ended up suing Gearbox. See, Aliens Colonial Marines took an extremely long time to make. The reason? Well, it turns out that was in large part due to Borderlands 2. See, Borderlands 2 was in development simultaneous with Colonial Marines, and it turns out that Gearbox surprised surprise, surprise, invested far more in their IP than the licensed one. Gearbox not only diluted the time and energy put into Aliens for Borderlands 2, it turns out they also used the money Sega was giving them to create the game on Borderlands 2 as well, investing the Alien stipends into that game instead. Hopefully, you're starting to see a pattern of behavior. It's going to be important a little later on. Borderlands 2, however, benefited greatly from the attention. Borderlands 2 is without a doubt one of the greatest games of the previous generation. It was essentially the MMO-like genre. It was Destiny and The Division before those games even began development. But it was those games without the BS. It's an FPS that gets the FPS part right first. The controls, the fluidity and movement, the gunplay is absolutely unrivaled in the genre. Playing Borderlands 2 at times feels like you're ice skating and how smooth it all feels. It nails a consistent tone of dark humor that is not only hilarious but varied in character after character, filled with nuances and well-written dialogue to go along with a reasonable enough main tale. But most importantly, it got two things right in ways that the rest of the console crowd struggled with. Co-op. Co-op was to the last gen what microtransactions are to this gen. Co-op had to be in literally every game. Every genre, every shooter had to have some sort of co-op game mode. Borderlands 2 happened to get it right. Playing co-op, joining a game, progressing was not only fun, well-balanced and easy, but it was also far more than just a toss-in mode. It was integral to the experience. But beyond that, there was the creme de la creme, the reason to buy Borderlands 2, the loot. The marketing made promises in jest, like the gazillion weapons promise or the endless loot promise, but in reality, picking up and playing the game felt just like that. There was an endless supply and variety of toys that were comically, cosmetically, and functionally different. These guns dropped at appropriate rates. They kept you playing and they became the stars of the show. In the early 2000s, Borderlands 2 solved the loot problem well before Destiny and The Division would so ineptly fail to do so. Borderlands had gone from very good to great, but it was about to get a little less exceptional, and it's going to lead into exactly what we know about Borderlands 3. There is an idiom that says that after failure, there's nowhere to go but up. Well, if that holds true, then in theory, after success of the highest form, there's nowhere to go but down. And down is arguably where Borderlands went after 2. Gearbox knew that they weren't ready to create a full-blown sequel to Borderlands 2. Pitchford himself stated that they just don't know how they'd properly follow that up, so instead, they decided to cash in, while they could, as they pursued another option. That option being Battleborn, which we'll come back to. As far as cash-ins go, this wasn't the worst one ever developed. In isolation, Borderlands the pre-sequel is actually a reasonably good game, and its reviews reflected that, settling in at a respectable low 70 rating. But when placed into the context of the series as a whole, the flaws begin to shine a little brighter. The pre-sequel was quite literally just a lot more Borderlands 2. In fact, that's almost entirely what it was, except it was a little bit less interesting. The pre-sequel took the game to Pandora's moon, and this had a lot to do with the game's problems. The first is that this locale was far too spread out for its own good. There was far too much time spent traveling slowly between encounters than there was actually engaging in these encounters. And what this led to was patches of boredom, and in some ways, boredom would be a theme that carried throughout the game. Many missions felt a little too monster closet-y, which led to some tedium and a feeling of gameplay fatigue that was absent from the previous 2 entries. And while Handsome Jack and the characters of the game are a bright spot, the story itself is significantly less intriguing than those characters. And all of this is wrapped into a game that begins to feel very repetitive very fast, especially towards the end when the samey environments have worn thin and the mission structure begins to repeat itself. But more unfortunate than any of that is it was a game that wanted to be 2's New Vegas and fell short. It was a game made on the same engine, a game that was essentially a reskin, a game passed off to a different dev, but instead of being better, it was the lesser experience. If you had played the previous 2 Borderlands games, the problems with the pre-sequel are exacerbated. Sure, the added variety in weaponry was nice, the voice acted characters were an improvement, and the low gravity added some spice of life touch to the game, but it's just not enough to be worthy of being the pseudo kind of follow-up to a game that was far better. The problem for Gearbox is not the games like the pre-sequel exist. Again, a lot of players found enjoyment in the game. Despite the near universal gripes, no, their problem is a changed industry, a changed publisher, and exactly how easy it would and likely will be to turn the franchise into something far more menacing.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
There are some pretty obvious industry problems with what Borderlands has been for 3 mainline entries, and there's almost no chance that the money-hungry Gearbox won't attempt to change Borderlands to fit the new industry standards. And unfortunately, that may not be what's best for the franchise. Today's industry is defined by live services, by MMO lights, by games that continue to be monetarily productive through microtransactions and predatory tactics, for longer and more extended periods of time. Borderlands, on the other hand, has always been defined by things like couch co-op, extremely generous DLC offerings, and most importantly, a focus on the single-player experience. Multiplayer has always been a supplement. With that being said, Borderlands is the one franchise that was kind of built to be easily shifted into this new MMO space. Borderlands has always been what these games are without the MMO functionality, but there's 2 problems with this. The first problem is games like Borderlands, as it was, simply won't sell as well as its competition in today's medium. Gamers are looking for these multi-mode PvE, PvP experiences, and in some ways, that makes a modern Borderlands a one-trick pony and look like far lesser of a value to these gamers. The second problem is what Randy Pitchford and Gearbox will do with that information. Picture this, a Borderlands game with PvP, PvE, live events, loot boxes, and a shared world. Take-Two publishes Borderlands. They are the same company that said recently that despite their aggressive microtransaction tactics with GTA 5 and Shark cards, and the destruction they caused with 2K18 using the same strategy, that they wanted to further attack the market in this way, and that they want every game they publish from here on out to have similar recurrent consumer spending opportunities. A fancy way of saying microtransactions. This means that the likelihood of a future game in the franchise, which we're about to talk about, being free of these ideals is slim to none. We've seen this behavior from Gearbox already. We watched them chase the mobile crowd with Battleborn, charge too much for it at launch, create post-launch monetization plans, flounder out of the gate against better competition, and abandon the game altogether almost immediately. Borderlands is kind of like what psychologists refer to as an at-risk individual. It's a game that has a far greater risk of falling victim to bad habits and making bad decisions than most. This is both due to who makes these games and what these games are. But we do know a bit about what the next Borderlands game is, or whether or not it even exists, and it's time to talk about that.
Let's go. If you could gaze into the future, you might think life would be a breeze.
The worst kept secret in gaming over the past 12 months is the existence and development of Borderlands 3, or 4. We actually know a little bit more about the game than we do for most unreleased and unannounced products. Some of that is probably intentional given Randy Pitchford's documented history of intentionally leaking things about his games to the press. Gearbox has been at the very least brainstorming ideas for the next mainline Borderlands and testing these ideas for over 6 years, beginning all the way back in early 2012. It was around this time that Gearbox began looking forward and into a shifting medium. It's around this time that thoughts of things like Battleborn, properties that are more sustainable, took over. Borderlands 4 was given a possible release window between holiday 2018 and fall of next year in a recent earnings call from Take-Two, the game's publisher, being excited at making a comeback after the failure of Battleborn. From there, there's a lot of educated guessing going on across the community. The game will more likely than not take place somewhere other than Pandora's immediate vicinity, the location of, technically speaking, all 4 of the game's releases and spin-offs. Instead, as teased at the end of Borderlands 2, A New World could be the star of the show, the New World Promethea. As PC Gamer stated recently, hints of a new world named Promethea were discovered by Battleborn sleuths, including hidden graffiti of a vault symbol and peculiar audio patterns heard from portal anomalies, beckoning listeners to Promethea and warning of Patricia Tanis, the unhinged scientist researching the vault's mysterious origins. Promethea's candidacy was strengthened most recently by a tweet last month from the official Borderlands account that restated the Battleborn Easter egg in clearer form. It lost Borderlands 2's lead writer, it's lost voice actors, and yet according to Pitchford, 90% of Gearbox is working on a single project. The project being teased, as you probably guessed, is almost certainly the next Borderlands. This is a release that will surprise next to no one, and a release that will make or break an entire company's future within this medium. Gearbox is a game maker that has lost all of its goodwill. It has a face that has lost the trust of every gamer that once supported him, a track record that shows a lack of care and concern, and a history of developing out of convenience. And there's an IP wrapped up in all of that that deserves to be as great as everyone who's ever touched it knows it can be. Borderlands 3 is a win-win proposition for that company. It's a game that will sell an absolutely enormous sum of copies regardless of the quality of the experience or what the game becomes. It's a game that even if it fails critically, will still find a home in the consoles and PCs of everyone that touched a controller last generation. And if it's great, if it's anywhere near what Borderlands 2 became, then Gearbox is right back on top of the gaming world. But Gearbox, here's the reality you're facing. You want to screw with Duke Nukem? Fine. We all knew that it would be awful. You want to destroy aliens? Well, at least that's a licensed game, even if some honesty would have been great. Want to shut down Battleborn and throw in the towel after 5 minutes? Fine. No one was attached to that game. But Borderlands is a name people care about, that people love. You must do this right. I know industry trends are tempting. I know story-based co-op games aren't exactly flying off the shelves right now, or even getting made for that matter. But be very careful with what you do to Borderlands. We've seen games that fly in the face of trends work. We've seen things like God of War this very year. You have a cash cow on your hands, a name people will blindly throw money at, and you can lose all of that overnight if you aren't careful. Evolve Borderlands, grow Borderlands, but let Borderlands continue to be Borderlands. It's not rocket science. People love this franchise for what it is, so as much as you can, keep it that way. Do not f this up. Well guys, that is it for today's doc, and now it is your turn. What do you think about what this has become? What do you think about what Borderlands is today? What do you think about the pre-sequel? What is the best entry in the franchise to you? And maybe most importantly, what do you want to see out of Borderlands 3? Do you want to see the exact same game that the pre-sequel and 2 were? What do you think needs a change? And if it's going to become an MMO life, if it's going to become a Division or Destiny, what do you want to see it avoid? Let me know the answers to any of those questions down in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you're not yet a member of this team, press subscribe. I put out gaming analysis, examinations, and essays just like this one twice, sometimes 3 times a week. So hit subscribe so you do not miss any. As you guys know, quick update, the studio is almost done. The move is almost done, 2 weeks away now. So these shaky cam videos, if this is your first video of mine, not normally how I do things at the end of the videos. I'm sorry about that. It's simply because I'm in the process of a move, so bear with me. Really quickly and importantly, I want to give a big shout out to Marco. Marco is the man behind the new style of thumbnails. Sorry. Marco is an amazing artist. I implore all of you, if you guys are artists, to just get your stuff out there. Put it on Twitter, put it on Instagram, wherever you are. Your art deserves to be seen just like Marco's. So thank you, Marco. And like I said, if you're an artist, just do what you love and get it out there and forget what everybody else says. And as always, if you did enjoy this video, I'm sorry. I put up more and more each and every week. Maybe you'll catch one of those. Maybe you'll enjoy that. But if not, thank you for giving me and this channel a shot. And until next time, guys, I'm out.